Hey, everyone. Today, I am so excited to talk to Dr. Anna Maria Dumitru. Anna is soon to be a sixth-year resident in surgery at UC San Diego. Anna is currently doing her research years here in Philadelphia at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, or CHOP. Anna, I know you explicitly asked not to share a detailed bio, but I was excited to talk to you for many reasons. You are a woman of deep curiosity and faith. You have an unabiding love of science and medicine, and you have spent your young life so far exploring medicine, science, and faith in a way that I think is not just mutually intelligible, but very enriching. And I think most striking to me, though, is that you remain one of the most conscientious people I've had the pleasure of meeting. You reliably stand up for what you believe in, even when it can be wildly unpopular. And you do so with, and you have done so with great courage and humility your entire academic career. So Anna, thank you so much. It's wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you. That's a very, very generous introduction.
Well, it's all true. And I wanted to start out by reading something that you wrote, I think as a first-year surgical resident. It's published on PubMed. It's called The Journey Within. And I so enjoyed reading it. And I thought this one paragraph really stood out to me, and I thought it would be a lovely place to start. Here you write, "Beyond our interactions with our patients, we are called to bring that hope and light to our colleagues as well. In an age where burnout is rampant, we have access to the spiritual cures. We have daily opportunities to live our vocations out loud. By regaining the right to be fully Catholic and fully engaged in medicine, we can recover from some of the emotional exhaustion and disillusionment we face and channel our energy into renewing our workplace by reclaiming our mission. We are called to be different because at the root of it all, we understand that in this world, love is always intertwined with sacrifice. As physicians, our vocation centers on entering into the bittersweet, giving our lives to the pursuit of the sweet joys of health while walking side by side with our neighbors through the bitter valley of suffering." Anna, I absolutely love that. And we're going to dive much deeper into some of those ideas. But Anna, walk me back to how you became interested in all of these things, because you were a young girl who, as I imagined, thought that she could be just one of 10 different professions. So walk me back to when you were a little girl. What first captured your imagination?
So, that's very interesting because I, in some ways, have had a singular purpose since a very young age, which has been kind of surprising, I guess, given how I've evolved in other aspects and areas of interest. But when I was in kindergarten, I told my parents I was going to medical school.
Did you?
I did. And then as an elementary school student, we had those like dress up like the career you want to be days. And I think the first one I picked was Florence Nightingale. And then after that, I think it was Marie Curie. So it's sort of always been there in my, at least subconscious or in my heart, I guess, that I've been interested in science and medicine. I kind of, as I grew up, I realized that they weren't always intertwined as a path, and I think I didn't really know. I was actually, ignorance is bliss sometimes. When I got to the point of applying to medical schools, I was fortunate that I was working in a lab in Chapel Hill at the time, a year after graduating. I actually just started the lab. It was probably like June, July, and one of my friends invited me to the defense of an MD PhD student who was in one of the other labs at the center. And that was the moment where it kind of clicked for me. And I thought, oh, I could actually do both of these things as a career. But the ignorance is bliss part, I actually thought it would be easier to get into the MD PhD route than to choose one or the other. I thought you got two chances when you apply for that.
Not.
So I was glad I didn't know better. And, it did work out. But it has been an interesting journey since that point too, because I think I received a lot more negativity once I decided I wanted to be a physician scientist, as opposed to prior to that. I think maybe part of it is just the practicality of it. People started telling me you can never fully do both. You're never going to be good at both. And I started sort of exploring, why is that? Because shouldn't they be related? Shouldn't we be working hand in hand with, you know, the discovery side and the practical applicability side to patient care and that sort of thing? The faith component, I would say it evolved separately, but then sort of fit naturally. I grew up in a religious household, and my faith has always been important to me. It's grown as I've grown, I think. But also I never really had to think really consciously about how my faith affected my studies until I got to medical school. And so I was in a very different environment. And some of my classmates had sort of no point of reference to a religious upbringing. And suddenly, they had a lot of questions about, well, how does your faith impact your practice of medicine or your interest in science? And it sort of puzzled me at first, because I was like, well, shouldn't they be
Yeah.
directly related? But I realized that that's actually not an opinion that a lot of people share. So
Anna, to clarify, explain where you grew up and then contrast that to where we went to medical school.
Oh, sure.
I
Yeah,
think
that's
that could help. Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up in the South, the Bible Belt. Everyone I knew went to something on the weekends, whether it was church or synagogue or temple, or everyone had a thing they did on weekends that was related to God. And then I got to medical school in New Hampshire, and we had a lot of classmates who had never been. They had no background, or it was something that they started doing when they were kids and their parents kind of stopped going at a certain point, whatever. So it suddenly was very odd that I went to church on Sundays. It was like a point of conversation, like, oh, you did what?
Yeah. And were you ever considering a career in just science? Or what was it about medicine that compelled you from kindergarten?
Yeah, I think I liked the idea of taking care of people. I liked being there in the moment, knowing how to help. And I felt like medicine was an area where that was your job. It was like to know how to take care of people who are going through something difficult. And then I've always tended towards more of like the math science.
Mhm.
Although I like to write. That has
Yeah.
probably been true. I started journaling when I was in elementary school as well, but I never really saw myself as a writer first. I guess I always saw myself as like studying math and science, and then also enjoying the writing aspects. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess science, I liked doing experiments. I remember, granted, they woo you in, right? We start making ice cream in the 7th grade in science class, and that's kind of hard to resist. And
The
then
next thing you know, you're getting a
right,
PhD.
right, you're locked in, and it's just you're still turning things blue and green, and yeah, it's
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. What was your when did you decide you wanted to pursue a career in surgery?
It was very much at the end of the game. I really did not see it coming, and that's probably for the best as well. Um, I It's funny though, because I should have known that I like procedures. I'm very interested in working with my hands, and I went to grad school and enjoyed the basic science aspects, pipetting and things like that. But somehow I didn't translate that to my clinical interests. I guess it was sort of the final piece that made me think like, oh, okay, this all fits in my life experience. But I actually designed my 3rd year medical school clinical rotations such that surgery was my very last block. And my rationale was that I thought it was just something I definitely didn't want to do. And so I put it at the end of the year. I was like, I'm going to try everything else, and then I'll get through my surgery rotation. And the joke was definitely on me, because here we are.
Here we are.
Surgery.
6 years later.
Yeah. But I got to my surgery block, and I was committed to doing something else with my life. I think I probably realized halfway through that year of clinicals that I liked procedures. And then I got to surgery, and I was on trauma surgery first, and I loved it. And I was shocked by that. And then I had to like do some soul searching I went from trauma surgery to plastics, and I liked that too. And then I was like, oh no, now
Uh-oh.
what? So I told myself I would wait until the end of the block. And if I did well on the shelf, then I would change my life and go into surgery. And if I didn't, it was a sign from above that it was not for me. And here we are.
Now, Anna, you've also written about and presented on a lot of issues about medical ethics and bioethics. When did
Yeah.
that interest develop?
So, it turns out well, this is kind of tangentially related, but my cousin has a friend whose husband is not Romanian, but she is Romanian, and my family is Romanian. So we were sitting around at probably a Christmas dinner table at some point. They were visiting, and the husband shared with me that he's read blogs about what it's like to be married to a Romanian woman. And it turns out that we like men to argue. And I thought that was funny at the time, but I was, reflecting. It's like, actually, yeah, it's just it's not even just in relationships, but it's just, I enjoy having, argument is maybe the wrong word in this context, but
Discussion.
debates, discussions, discourse about what the meaning of things is. And it's actually really fun when people don't necessarily agree or share the same opinions. It's like just a very interesting opportunity to explore how people develop their ideas and their beliefs, and what shapes and impacts each of us and what we hold on to. And then sometimes it gets heated, and that's not always as comfortable, but uh it's just like really, it's meaningful to me to have those deep conversations and to really get into it. So um all of that to say, that also started at Dartmouth when it was probably partway through my first year. I started having these conversations with some of my classmates. And, it usually was something as a study break. We'd be sitting in what was then Dana Library, with no air conditioning back in the day, just like reading something, and we'd get bored and start talking about random ethical issues. And I liked it, but I also realized I was not very much for debating at that point because I had never really had to articulate my beliefs before. So it kind of felt like marshmallows in my mouth. I was like, I believe this because
Why? Yeah.
yeah, because it's right, because
Yeah.
I think this is the truth. And then it's like, how do you have this conversation, especially as, we've mentioned that a lot of our classmates didn't necessarily have any sort of religious context. And so I wanted to learn how to have these conversations without necessarily bringing up religion as like the only source and foundation of, beliefs. Because it's like, if somebody's not interested in the religious arguments at all, then it's like, where's the conversation? So I took a summer seminar at the Witherspoon Institute out of it's in Princeton's campus area. And that was kind of a gamble on my part, I will say. I
How
was
so?
very, very interested in taking the seminar. It was about, I think it was called medical ethics.
Uh-huh.
So I heard about it. I wanted to sign up, but the course was held for a week in the summer, and it was the week before the week of my step 1 exam. And so as far as timing goes, I thought that was not great. But I just, I prayed about it, and I was like, I really want to do this. I don't know when I'm going to have another opportunity. And I just kind of felt like I should roll the dice and go. So I signed up, and my flights were booked. And the day before I was supposed to fly out, I took a practice exam, and it was like the lowest score I've ever gotten. And I panicked a little. I was like, what am I doing? Am I throwing away my
Yeah.
practical medical career for my interest in medical ethics? But I kind of just decided, okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna go. And you know, I was there. The seminar was pretty intensive. It was, I think, something like 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. It was a pretty long
Yeah.
course, but it was life-changing. I was, finally exposed to people who were very articulate about their beliefs and able to engage in discourse and dialogue in all kinds of different ways, and to just approach arguments thoughtfully without emotion, without like a visceral response, and to really think about what the underlying issues were, what was really, the root of certain arguments, things like that. And I loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. And I came back and I took the step exam the next week and it went fine. So I was like, all right, great.
Yeah. So tell me, Anna, what are some of the ethical questions that you have found the most interesting? And it can be, I was going to ask you about your research too, and do any arise from that project in particular?
Yeah, yeah. I think most of what I, you know, talked about early on was the question of when life begins,
Sure.
this kind of idea of what um, what constitutes a human being or human person, and is personhood distinct from life forms, and how does that sort of um, how do we distinguish like different what it means to be human as opposed to like being a dog or a fish or other living creatures that depending on your beliefs may or may not have souls, immortal souls ascribed to them. So uh I've always thought that was a very interesting set of questions, and I really like hearing what people uh think about the different stages and just personhood in general. What I work on right now is more of, so my lab is a fetal gene editing lab. It's a gene editing lab in general, but we also have a specific interest in fetal gene editing. Um, and that has been a really fun, it's some of the coolest science I've ever worked on. Also very, very rich in ethical questions in terms of all of it, really.
Yeah.
Um, I think the COVID pandemic has highlighted that gene editing is not something that everyone is on board with, and I think that's a very reasonable, you know, area for discussion, because when we're talking about making permanent or semi-permanent alterations to our genetic code, that is a big deal. So I like talking about that kind of stuff too. I went to a conference, a big ethics conference last year, and I was surprised that actually some of the people who had the most emotional response to this idea of fetal gene editing were disability rights advocates.
Mm.
And they felt like if we were pursuing, so some of our projects are looking at trying to design one-time therapies that we can inject in a pregnant mom to edit a fetus that's been diagnosed with a devastating type of disease in utero. So their argument was that there was a danger that we were going to medicalize disability in general, and that would create even more of a hardship for people who chose not to pursue treatment or interventions up front, and that it would create just like a even more stigma than what the disability community is already dealing with. So I thought that was very interesting, and honestly something I hadn't considered before.
Yeah. And so I want to go back to how you described some of the initial conversations you had with people in our medical school who were talking to a Catholic person for the very first time, who had opinions and beliefs that differed so starkly from their own. What surprised you the most about those encounters? And what did you take away from how we could be having conversations better between people of faith, whatever that faith is, and people who don't? But together we have to work on some very hot button issues.
Yeah, I think what surprised me the most initially was probably that people really wanted to have the conversations.
Yeah.
I think in the first couple of years at Dartmouth, I never instigated, to my knowledge or memory, a conversation about anything I believed in. I was kind of I'm doing my thing, you're doing your thing, all good. And then people started asking me like, hey, you mentioned you went to church on Sunday. Like, why'd you do that?
Yeah.
And then it was, things would come up. We'd start learning about things like, I think we had, I don't even remember at what point in time, but, when we got to our OB course and we started talking about abortion and birth control and that kind of stuff, I think I got a lot of questions. Again, it was, library questions or
Yeah.
other type of study break moments. One of the
Yeah.
most distinct memories I have, which I've written about, was right before one of our anatomy practical exams. And I was standing outside that tiny little hallway. We were all there with our notes, our afternoon session group. And one of my classmates, my back was in a corner. He cornered me and was like, well, I just don't understand what the difference is between the Catholic Church's teaching on natural family planning and just using birth control to plan pregnancy. And I was thinking like, I really just want to read my notes, for like one last time for
Yeah.
the exam. But like also in that moment, I thought, well, he's asking because he's actually curious
Yeah.
and he might not ask again. So I should just have this conversation now and be in this moment. It was a little bit awkward because it wasn't, I at that time was not as comfortable engaging in conversations about controversial issues and just owning the fact that it's beautiful when we have different opinions. And so I really wanted to have like a quiet conversation as opposed to like an entire hallway
Yeah.
conversation. And the minute we started talking, a bunch of heads turned, and I was kind of like, all right, well, it'd be cool if I were a little more articulate here, but
Yeah. Yeah.
here we are. But yeah, so I think one of the things that I really enjoyed was that I got to know my classmates pretty well as a result of diving into these, because once you start asking questions of each other and sort of holding each other accountable to like, you know, what's the reason for your beliefs and how did you get there? And does this, make sense logically? And, is this a reasonable argument and that kind of thing? It becomes very fun to have those deep conversations. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you may or may not even remember this, but we didn't squarely overlap in medical school, and we met on like I think we met up for lunch on the very last day before we graduated because our schedules finally aligned, even
yeah,
though you're MD PhD, so you were a couple of years ahead.
yeah,
And I just remember thinking like, wow, I wish I had been friends with her for these last 4 years, because one of the things I really admired about you is you had engaged so many of our classmates in what could have otherwise been very hostile and contentious discussions into just a really fun time. And I remember that distinctly. And I thought that was such a unique skill that you possessed, or clearly you had honed. Maybe it didn't come naturally to you the first time you
yeah,
attempted it. But I remember one of the starkest first impressions I had of you was you engaging people who, inside I was thinking, oh gosh, this could go very poorly, but doing so in a way that was just fun. And it turns out everyone is really only interested in controversial questions because those are the fun and interesting ones.
yeah.
So I greatly admired how you approached a lot of our classmates and successfully navigated these sort of tricky shark-infested waters in a way that was not just constructive, but legitimately entertaining for everyone involved.
It definitely was a growth experience. I would not say that I had any particular diffusing skills in argument situations going into this, but I mean, I guess I am a middle child, so there is an element of,
Yeah. And you're
mediator.
Romanian.
Yeah, and Romanian also. So, trying to find that happy medium for conversation. And I also personally am very confrontation averse in general.
Yeah.
I don't like to fight.
Yeah.
Um, I am willing to, I think I'm persistent, but I'm not like an aggressor type at
Yeah.
all. So I kind of learned in the first couple of conversations, okay, like this is a point where often people start to get heated, and then trying to find ways to either bring humor back into that moment or to just like own the emotion and say, like, I noticed that we're both getting really frustrated here, and I'm wondering if you know, that's because we've hit a nerve and this is something that really matters to us. The other thing I think that was helpful to me was actually learning that in a lot of these conversations, what I realized is that a lot of my classmates or classmates who had very different beliefs had the same sort of gut instinct reason for having those beliefs. You know, it's like,
tell me more about that.
like people who I had some of the most colorful debates with in terms of when life begins and, you know, whether birth control was something that should be just like generically over the counter available, that kind of stuff. They wanted the same things. They wanted to build communities and families, and they wanted to protect women and specifically, but families in general, and to, you know, they cared about poverty and crime and things like that, and they wanted to sort of level the playing field. We just had different interpretations of how to get there and what was actually good for women and families. And so I thought that was very helpful in terms of you know, being able to see the humanity and the goodness in the people I was talking with, who maybe had totally different interpretations of how to take care of, you know, our patients as we molded into physicians. Yeah. So, and that also I think helped to build friendships and bridges. You know, I think I still remember when I started, my roommate from the first 2 years and we started the Medical Students for Life group at Dartmouth early on. And I remember we had a meeting with some of the Med Students for Choice leaders to talk about potentially doing like a debate or something. And one of my classmates at the time, at the end of it, she remarked, she was like, wow, that actually was a very easy meeting. I wasn't expecting that to be so easy, you know. And then she said something it was kind of funny to me. It was like, it was basically like, I didn't expect that I could be friends with you.
Yeah.
Kind of like,
Yeah.
thanks,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I ask because these issues trigger such disgust,
yeah.
primal disgust.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that's partly because of the serious nature, you know, of a lot of these issues. And so there is something to be said for you know, the seriousness of the conversations. But I guess it's just, you know, at the end of the day, we're all still humans who have goodness in us, and it's about, you know, finding that in each other in those heated moments, I guess.
Yeah. I'm curious, Anna, you know, we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can serve our patients better or should. And the truth is a lot of Americans do identify with a major faith, and it is a very active part of their lives. But that's not something that is frequently emphasized in medical training the same way sort of other population-based traits are emphasized in our medical training. So I was curious, what do you think, or in your experience talking with a lot of people in medical school, what do you think we could be doing better sort of at the administrative level to increase sensitivity on all fronts and sort of give more medical students the experience that you had as part of their training? And I'm wary of saying that because the last thing anyone wants is like another online sensitivity training. That's
Right.
what.
Right. I'm not a huge fan of the online training in general for any reason. I just had to redo the fire safety long ago, and I was like, okay. Done this one for I think 16 years or something. Like, and honestly, I'm not convinced that I would know how to work a fire extinguisher should I have to, even though I watch the video every year. But anyway, I think the challenge is, and this is actually something, so I'm part of an organization that's growing right now. It's called the Hippocratic Society. It evolved from the Hippocratic Forum, and the goal is to help form good physicians and to explore what it means to be a good physician. It's a very cool organization. But I think one of our conversations in terms of planning is, you know, how do you engage with people? Because if you mandate a course, then automatically you're going to get people who resent it and do everything they can to minimize its effect on them, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And if you don't mandate it, then you're less likely to get the people who maybe need it the most
Yeah.
to actually participate. And, you know, part of it, especially in medical school, it's so busy all the time. There's so much that you could be doing with your time. So to, you know, design a course that requires people to essentially volunteer their very little free time in order to be part of it, it kind of selects for people who maybe would already naturally have an inclination to explore areas of empathy and to get into, you know, deeper levels of conversation. So it's tough. I don't know what the best
Yeah.
solution is. I think it's also, I mean, I don't envy the people who plan medical education. It seems like a really tough job trying to fit in what's important, what's not important.
Yeah.
I think our medical school actually did a really good job with courses like the on doctoring course,
Yeah.
where it kind of puts you in small group settings and uh, you know, uh, asked, you know, we went through different topics and modules and we had a moderator, and I think that gave people an opportunity to open up a little more and to talk about, you know, what it means to be a good physician, what it means to be listening, and how to engage in, you know, with diverse patient populations of different beliefs. But I think, I don't know, I guess part of it too is like there's no real better way to learn than by practical experience. So I think it's this back and forth between I have this patient interaction and maybe it didn't go as well as I wanted it to. So maybe I look for resources on how to make that better, or I talk to people who I think have had similar experiences and maybe they share with me how they did or didn't navigate things. So kind of a learning tug of war from there too.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers.
No, no, it does. It's not an easy, and some specialties, frankly, you know, this comes up more often in OBGYN and pediatrics and kind of less so in our
Yeah.
general surgery bubble. But it's something I've thought about often is that sort of the religious aspect of our patient population is not typically part of the medical school level discourse on diversity and so on and so forth.
It's interesting too, because I
Yeah.
think most of the patients I've taken care of who are religious, they make it known pretty explicitly.
Yeah.
And you know, so I've been in situations where patients will start praying out loud in rooms and things like that. And it's it's interesting because I agree with you actually that we don't really get any sort of training in that. We get a lot of other diversity training, but we don't necessarily get the what do you do if somebody just like stops, drops, and prays, you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
or asks you to pray with them, and what
Yeah.
do you do then? How do you like,
Yeah.
you know, yeah.
I'm curious, Anna. You're very thoughtful, and I imagine that a lot of maybe some of the opinions that you held with regards to medical ethics and so on might have changed once you actually started becoming a practicing physician, or changed over the course of medical school, or even just in the course of your own research in gene editing. What are Have you changed your mind about anything, or what are you wrestling with, or what do you find just even more intractable today than you thought, 6 years ago, 10 years ago? My goodness.
Yeah, I think some of my opinions are like, yeah, I've always believed this, and it makes more sense. The more I see it, the more I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
yes, I feel like I have found the truth on this. And then some things are like, I guess probably the one where I've been the most surprised has really been with the end of life, because
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
surgery we see a lot of patients who unfortunately die, and just, you know, the way that people die, I have been really surprised. You know, I had read extensively about end of life issues during medical school, and it seemed much more black and white on paper. And then in the trauma context, especially, you know,
Yeah.
burn and trauma, those situations, and the surgical ICU, it often is not as
Yeah.
black and white. And so I think that has been interesting. It's also been interesting for my like personal, if I'm thinking about my own mortality and, what types of interventions I might want and not want at the end of life, and sort of the confusion between doing everything reasonable and, when, at what point it's also reasonable to say, at this point, anything else we do is only going to harm and not benefit. So yeah, I think that has been interesting to see the evolution of, just from practical exposure.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day about how actually you can get through a sizable amount, if not all of your medical training, without actually intimately experiencing death, right? Because you have taking out a patient who like acutely decompensates. A lot of the patients we take care of are trending in that general direction for a while, and then the extent of our involvement is often like a comfort care order set, and then being notified that, some hours later that by the bedside nurse that the patient has expired. So I'm curious what it is about death that you find so interesting, considering that we actually don't interact with it all that much, or as much as I think people assume that we do in medical training.
Yeah, I think there have been certain moments in my first couple of years of residency where I've seen a very peaceful and beautiful death transition, where it was a patient who we knew was very sick and was surrounded by family. And, I've been in patient rooms, as, seeing on a heart monitor. I was on our burn unit once, and in the ICU, we had a patient who was very sick and was actively dying, had gotten past the point where we could do anything else. And the family was all there, and they were, as I was watching his monitor and seeing all of his vitals trending below the level of, coming back, I walked into the room and they were praying the rosary, very Catholic tradition. And I just, said the last decade of the rosary with them as the patient expired, and then pronounced him. And I thought that was just like a very beautiful and peaceful. It was still very sad, but it was like also a very peaceful transition.
Mm.
Whereas I think sometimes on the trauma service, we have patients coming in who are already coding, and it's just a very bloody, disruptive mess. And it's, in those moments, I think too, even if we're able to temporarily stabilize them, some of those patients end up having a very emotional roller coaster of ups and downs before dying. And that has been interesting to watch as well. There's a family on that we were having a goals of care discussion with them, and I remember it, it makes me kind of chuckle a little bit, I guess, if that's the right word, but it's like surprising to me, because the conversations we had, I thought we were having a very reasonable conversation about goals of care, and then they started yelling at me and told me that they're very Catholic and that they understand how us doctors are trying to, pull the plug on your family member. And I was like, oh no, but I'm also Catholic. And I'm trying to, like, I think we're walking a line here where the options I've presented you with are, all within
Your faith.
yeah. So it was just, it's kind of like those types of things where I'm like, okay, maybe the way that I understand death and the way that I understand the procedures we do and the window around death has evolved as I've actually seen it in practice.
Yeah. Now your future career path is pediatric surgery,
I
correct?
hope so.
Which I think you are someone who absolutely loves pediatric surgery, and I have no doubt you're going to have just a wonderful career. Is there a way that you think you can explore some of these ethical issues in the pediatric population moving forward? Or, we typically don't see the same chronic disease burden that leads to a slow faltering demise in the pediatric world. Is there anything in the world of pediatric surgery that wets your whistle?
I mean, I think PEDS has a huge number of opportunities for ethical discussions, things like that. I do think at places like CHOP and at some of the big academic medical centers, we do see kids with chronic diseases. They have very challenging, we have a lot of kids on our list with cardiac issues, a lot of different heart problems that end up requiring long-term care. We have kids with all kinds of rare diseases that some of them I'd never even heard of before I got here. And now we study them in the lab. So that's been really interesting. But I think in terms of, I took a pediatric bioethics certification course the first year I was here. That was out of Kansas. I always say their name wrong. Kansas Children's Mercy. Anyway, it was a really great program, and we talked a lot about issues that I hadn't really spent that much time thinking about before, in terms of, kids can't consent, but they can assent.
Right.
For procedures, and then what it means to be an emancipated minor, and when do you notify parents, and who has the conversations, and what do you do if parents have deeply held religious beliefs that maybe would lead them to turn down medical care that's otherwise reasonable, and at what level does the government step in, and that kind of stuff. So I'm very interested in all of those things as well. And I love the kids.
Yeah. So that's actually a good way to lead in. So you are a surgery resident. You've already done your PhD. You're doing your now 3 years of research. When you finish your residency, what do you have such disparate interests, but they also make sense. They're cogent. So what do you think you will end up actually doing? You'll be a practicing full-time pediatric surgeon. And what else?
I mean, there's a possibility that by the time I actually finish training, I'll be ready to retire. So there's that also, because at this point I'm already, turning 35, and there's at least 5 or 6 years ahead of me before I have a real job. So, there's
that's the beauty of surgical training.
Lifelong learning, as they say. I think
what would be your ideal practice?
My ideal has changed a lot over time. I set out on this journey to become a physician scientist when I was 20 years old, and here we are 15 years later, and I'm still I don't know, 80-20, is that what they say? Is that the model? But the reality is that the two job descriptions are different. Medicine is much more structured, here's when you're on call, and these are the things that you have to do, and here's your OR block time, and this is your clinic day, whereas research is there are some deadlines, but everything's sort of hippie amorphous. From there, it's okay, yes, the NIH puts out their deadlines, and there's, I don't know, 3 per year. You either make it or you don't, but no one's gonna tell you have to. Well, your department chair might, but it's no one's gonna sit you down and say, write this grant now. It's much more of you have to make the time, find the time, and balance the other responsibilities. And then once you get to that point, it's also the aspects of mentorship and running a research program. I want to do all of that. I want to, at least at this point in my life, I think I want to have my own lab and run, come up with ideas, test out hypotheses, design the experiments, write the papers, that kind of thing. I like it. I like all of that. But then I also want to practice and see patients and be in the OR and be good at that. I don't want to be somebody that's like, oh, well, we'll turn a blind eye to her technical skills because they're a little bit lacking. I want to be, both of those things, but I also want to be there for my family and friends and have a life outside of the hospital and continue writing and be able to do other things like travel and the things that I enjoy doing. So it's I don't really know
Yeah.
what that looks like. I think there's also a small part of me that's like, I talk to some of my friends who have who are female physicians who have gotten married and had kids and sort of found more flexible career paths within medicine, either by starting a mobile medical practice
Mm.
or by pivoting to a different field and that kind of thing. So I think I'm always interested to see what the options are. And the beauty of medicine is that you really can
Do anything.
apply it in a lot of different ways, and you can change your mind mid-career and go back and get another fellowship if you want to. So that's also, something that's, I think, useful in medicine, or just like the academic versus community practice and sort of private or public, that kind of stuff. Like, I think there's a lot of different options there. I think that actually the research side ends up being a bit more challenging because you either have funding or you don't. And if you don't have funding, you can't really do experiments, at least on the basic science side, because everything costs money. Microscopes have to be like, the software costs money and has to be updated annually, and like just everything is,
Yeah.
but I
So
guess also there's biotech. So if you don't have funding or you don't want to deal with the academia aspects, you can work for a company that's designed to provide those things without you having to do it. So
I'm curious, Anna, your career path so clearly involves sort of three different personalities and skill sets. A surgeon, a scientist, and an ethicist. And more often than not, those are three different people. I'm curious which of those three roles has sort of felt the most comfortable, has come to you the easiest? Which one do you feel like you are continually struggling with? And what have you learned from attempting to do three very challenging things concurrently?
this is very Trinitarian from a Catholic perspective, like
Yeah.
3 and 1, 1 and 3. Yeah. I think in some ways the ethics piece is in the middle of the two, because the question of why am I doing things the way I'm doing them, and how do people make decisions about different aspects of their care. How do we conduct responsible scientific experiments? How do we decide what's worth pursuing, that kind of thing? I think that piece is sort of the what's a good way to describe, maybe like the boundary lines
Sure.
of both of the other fields. It's kind of like the thing that keeps them all linked. And the surgery side is the like, well, I guess actually both surgery and research it's a lot of technical skills and a lot of because operating it's an art form, I think, but also it's very much like learning the anatomy, learning the instruments, how to navigate, how to adapt in a changing environment. And I think basic science research also is, in many ways, it's learning techniques and learning how to troubleshoot and how to run experiments and interpret the results, but also then taking information from conferences and from other people. So I think there is overlap in all of them. The tension points really come in when you're trying to do them all at once. And that can be hard because it's, sort of each one requires your full dedicated attention in that moment. So it's a little bit like putting on the hat of like, okay, now we're going to have this conversation about the ethical boundaries, and, you know, then next we're going to talk about the actual technical aspects of the surgical procedure. And then after that, we're going to talk about the things that we're studying in the lab. Yeah.
And do you, or how have you found mentors who have sort of guided you into striking a balance between those three things? Because I think that can be really challenging for people in our stage.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also it's very interesting seeing how different mentors sort of navigate the challenges themselves. And I've been fortunate to have great mentors who are very honest and can say, like, you know, today I was a great doctor, but I wasn't a very good husband or wife. You know, I missed dinner and I didn't put my kids to bed, but I took care of my patient. Or like today I made the decision to, you know, be there for my family, and I had someone else cover for me, and this is what I did. And it's I think seeing the way that the decisions are made, and also, I mean, some of my closest mentors and people who I really admire and respect have failed dramatically at different aspects of their life and are very honest about that, very forthcoming about, you know, my first marriage ended because I didn't prioritize trying to maintain it. And or like, you know, I spiraled at some point and I was just in a really dark place, and it was horrible working with me because I was angry all the time. And so I think that's also been very helpful to me, learning from them and seeing, kind of learning from their shared experiences of their mistakes or what they wish they had done differently. Yeah.
It's hard to, that's awesome. It's hard. I think our field does seldomly discloses weakness, and
Yeah.
people are hypersensitive to maintaining a certain reputation that I think where those kind of conversations just don't routinely happen. So I'm really happy that you found people who have supported that and have been brutally honest with themselves and then with you.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of courage on their part. And also I think it's very freeing once you know, can own, hey, I'm not perfect and this is where I've had trouble before. Then you have a gift you can share with people coming after you, saying, you know, hey, this is what didn't work for me. This is how I think it could have been better. It's
Yeah. So tell me, Anna, you have written a book about surgery residency and your journey so far. Um, what made you want to write it? At what point did you sit down and think, I'm going to write a book about this experience?
so I've always liked to write, which I mentioned, but it was all journaling until probably after college in medical school. I interestingly told my high school guidance counselor that one of my goals, because they made us map out our goals and put on there, it's like, write a book by the time I graduate college. And I did not write at least I didn't write anything that was published. I journaled, if that counts. I've written journals cover to cover, but not, you know, not anything for public consumption. And I didn't intend to write a book about residency. I just felt compelled to write. It was a therapeutic exercise at first. It started, you know, I jotted down some notes to myself in an email draft that I'd saved in my, you know, drafts folder the night before my intern year started. It was just like, I was wide awake, freaking out about, I was starting on night float and I was terrified. It's like, I don't know, like, I just got to residency. It's my first night and there's only me and one other person in the hospital in-house. And what do I do? And I don't even know how to write orders, and you know, can't find anything. I was panicking a little bit, and I wrote a little about that, and it made me feel better enough, well enough to like get a few hours of sleep that night. So then I started, every time I had something on my heart that I just needed to work through, I started jotting down little paragraphs. I started keeping a document on my computer where it was just little notes to myself. This is what this felt like. This is what, or just like even one sentence, one line, a topic word that was like, this is what I'm feeling. And then when I moved to Philadelphia, it was after I did 3 clinical years in San Diego, and then I moved to Philadelphia for this postdoc. And there was a glitch in filing my paperwork. And as a result, I didn't have a job for the first month I was here. They had not onboarded me. So and how it is with these things, you have to do the steps. The boxes have to be checked.
Boxes must be checked.
Yeah, so there was no way to rush that process despite my pleading. And so for the month of July, I hadn't gotten my furniture yet. This was my life, just to paint you a picture of what that looked like. I was told I had to be here July 5th. The 4th of July was a Monday that year. So I was working through June 30th in San Diego. And I did what I had to do to get myself to Philadelphia from San Diego on that holiday weekend. I shipped my car, I shipped my stuff. And so the month of July was me like gradually reacquiring my possessions while sitting in the apartment with no furniture.
Yeah.
I showed up with like my suitcase, my backpack, and an air mattress. And I just, once I got internet, I didn't have to go to the coffee shop to write anymore. But that was literally, I didn't really know a lot of people in Philadelphia. And so I just sat there and wrote. I opened my laptop. I found that file that I had collected with jotted stuff down. And that was when I started to think, okay, I could just make this a therapeutic release at this point. I've been through 3 years that have formed me, and I'm struggling with some of the reconciling of what made residency so hard and what made it so great at the same time. It's like there are very beautiful moments taking care of people, and there are also very stressful moments, and sometimes they're in the same box.
Yeah.
So I started trying to process that, and once I got to like page 50, I was like, okay, well, I guess it's not just, yeah, not just a journal. This is turning into a book. So I finished it and then didn't touch it for several months, and then have kind of waffled as to whether I think it is meaningful or just a collection of journal writings and complaints, or maybe substantive or maybe not. And I came across, well, so I reached out, I found a publisher and started that process back in probably November, December. And then I kind of I got cold feet, I guess is the best way to put it. I went through the process and they were like, okay, are you done? Do you want us to put it out there? And I said, no, not yet. Hold on. And then I started letting people read it, because I was like, before I go through this, maybe let me get some more feedback. And then I adapted some of it again, and then I again decided I was not going to go through with it. And then I got an email. I am on a bunch of these chains that you never know how you got there, and sometimes there's something interesting that pops up. And one of the taglines, actually, let me see if I can find it, because it was like exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. That was like, sometimes everybody stresses about different things, and you just kind of, it's almost like you have to let go. Yeah, this is, can I read it?
Of course.
Nothing that I do is finished, writes the poet W.S. Merwin. So I keep returning to it, lured by the notion that I long to see the whole of it at last, completed and estranged from me. And then the author of this piece goes on to say, I'm sure we've all had similar experiences of trying to perfect a project or a skill set. Think of a writer who refuses to publish because he keeps tinkering with the paragraphs. And that really spoke to me. I was like, okay, all right.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
tell me, you wrote this book after your before you started here in Philadelphia. So you had 3 years of residency under your belt. And what about narrative medicine? I think more broadly has gained a lot of popularity in the last
Yeah.
5 years. Is this something that you think you'll continue?
I mean, I think I will definitely continue writing,
Yeah,
and I really like narrative medicine, especially because I think that's, I mean, it's kind of, it's
it's what
like what
medicine is.
our
Yeah,
lives are, right? It's
yeah,
like reflecting on the experiences. Medicine affords us, for better or worse, the opportunity to be with people in their most vulnerable moments, and when they're not at their best, and when we're not at our best in the middle of the night, on holidays, when all of us would rather be anywhere else, you know. And so I think writing as an outlet for that is a very good way to reflect and to think about, again, the meaning of it all and why something maybe resonated with me more or less in certain moments. So I definitely think that will probably always be part of my life and practice. In terms of like will I write another book? I don't know. We'll
but
see.
I'm curious, reflecting back on 3 years while you're writing this book, is there anything that you view differently in with the wisdom of a couple of years behind your belt that surprised you when you were writing it? Like as you were writing something, did you reflect on experiences that were very, uh,
Yeah, I went
significant
back
to you?
to a
Yeah,
lot of the moments of anger because what I realized was that residents are often angry people. And
you don't say.
it's right. And it's, I thought about some of the most challenging conversations I've had with other residents and, in heated moments in the hospital and sort of trying to analyze why was that? What was really going on there? Was it just that we were all tired and frustrated with each other or frustrated with an issue that was bigger than us in the healthcare system? And why did we get in so many fights about whose patient is this? And
Yeah,
why were we yelling? Like,
yeah.
I had a medical student who um she did a sub-I with me, and in my evaluation she wrote this as an intended compliment, but it was basically like, one of the things that I liked about Anna is that she can so smoothly transition from screaming at someone on the phone and slamming the phone down to teaching me something important about medicine. And I was like, oh my God, I have never been one to yell. But it's true. There were moments where it was like, all I could do was just like slam the phone down a few times and just, just be frustrated. It was stuff like,
The consult pager.
yeah, the constant pager too. I think that was one of the big reflecting points, was that it's so hard being the intern, not only because you're new and you're scared, I want to do the right thing, I want to know what to do and whatever, but also then like there's this box attached to you if it's an actual pager or another phone, and it's just constantly pinging. And it's so hard to think when there's so much noise. That was another thing that came up when I was reflecting. It's like, residency is loud. It's so noisy.
Yeah,
There are alarms and phones and pagers and, epic chat alerts and people trying to talk to you. And it's just sometimes chaos. It's
yeah.
so hard to think straight when there's so many different demands on our attention. So I kind of, I don't know, I think that was helpful to me in reflecting. It's just kind of breaking it down and analyzing what is it that makes residency so hard. It's not just one thing. There's a number of things I think
Yeah.
that contribute to it. But
So we know what makes it, unbearably chaotic. What has, as you were writing this book, what have you realized has made residency also just staggeringly beautiful?
yeah, I think that was the conclusion I came to when I was like, okay, I'm gonna stop here because I think this is all I have to say for now. It was like, I love it. I love what I do. I love my job, you know? It's
Yeah.
just, there are a lot of things that don't have to be that hard
Sure.
about it. There are the things that like are really beautiful about being a doctor, and it's so much better in residency than in medical school because you're a doctor, you know, you can actually, I can walk into a room and say, I'm Dr. Dumitru, and people are like, okay, all right, a doctor is seeing me. That's what I came here for. So like, all right, we're happy that this is happening, you know?
Yeah.
And I think uh it's really, really fun being with people, even when none of us are at our best. It's just like a very, even in some of the most like exhausted states I've been in, walking into a patient's room, talking to a family, that sort of thing is really energizing. It's just, I mean, it's not, it's obviously like, you know, there are situations that are extremely emotionally draining within medicine, and it, you know, the difficult conversations are very difficult. So that's not the sort of energizing moments I'm referring to. But I think overall, like day in and day out, I'm just really happy to be doing what I'm doing. I think, you know, it's always wanting to like do it a little bit better and change things about myself and my practice, and wanting to grow, and then seeing what kind of graded responses we can implement personally as a like surgical and scientific community, as a broader healthcare system. I think there's all kinds of tiers, and at every level there is a lot of room for improvement. I also think like we get a lot of things right too, so that's very satisfying. And I think you know, surgery itself, general surgery, can be especially satisfying with
Yeah.
some of our bread and butter cases where it's like, you know, you come in and your appendix is the problem. We can walk into your room and say, we'll take it out. We will treat you for this,
Yeah.
and you will be
Definitively.
better, you
Yeah.
know? And it's just, that's something that I don't know if, like, I imagine areas like psychiatry are probably more emotionally draining, because I think a lot of times you're walking with patients for their whole lives.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. It's a beautiful calling. It also requires a lot of patience and a lot of, you know, tenacity to keep walking that walk. Whereas, not to say that there aren't chronic surgical conditions too, but a lot of the times we can offer, you know, we walk in, we can remove an organ, we can change things around a little bit, and hopefully you feel better. And
Yeah.
that's very satisfying too. So
Why do you think you love being a doctor so much? Because that's a sentiment, you really do love being a doctor. That's not something that you're just saying.
yeah.
And that's not true across the board. And we are constantly being lectured about burnout and stuff in medicine. What do you think has given you this, or has shored up this love in spite of years of difficult training and anticipating years of difficult training ahead?
Yeah, I think it's a multi-layered question. Part of it is, you know, I've mentioned I just love working with people and taking care of people and knowing what to do in situations where people are hurting, and being able to offer something, sort of a sign of hope, some sort of, you know, even if it's not necessarily hope because of anything that I can do, just hope in the conversation of, you know, having a conversation about the meaning of it all and purpose in life, that kind of thing. Which I guess anecdotally, to explain that, when I was on my family med rotation in Montana, I sat in a patient room with a gentleman he had just retired, and you know, he wasn't sick, he didn't have any sort of medical disease that, you know, I think he came in for a well visit or something, and we got to talking, and he started telling me about how he was having a really hard time finding his footing in retirement because he was so used to having purpose with a job. And I talked to him for like 45 minutes. I was really surprised that my preceptor didn't come into the room, but he thought I had found something. My preceptor thought I had found something and we were going to do a procedure. So he was setting up the procedure room, which is why he didn't come into the patient room. And then he was really mad when I came out and was like, no, he's good. I think he
You
can
just
go
wanted
home.
to talk.
Yeah, he just wanted to talk, and we had a nice chat. My preceptor was like, gosh, but also okay,
Yeah.
so I think that's part of what, um, one of the things that's really fun about medicine is that sometimes it is about your medical expertise and sometimes it's about just the human connection. Um, and both of those can be really healing in their own way. I think, what was the other part of your question? Sorry.
Oh, no, I'm curious. You answered it. It was, how do you think you have sustained this love of being a doctor through
Oh yeah,
the,
yeah.
the, the
I
training
think
that everyone universally despises, which is
yeah,
surgical residency?
yeah. The other part is, for me, my faith is the central part of who I am, and I think
Yeah.
that has kept me centered and balanced. It's given me a lot of, resilience and energy when I've felt most drained. Um, when I lived in San Diego, I lived across the street from like a 24-hour chapel I could access with a key code.
Oh,
And
nice.
I would stop there on my way into work and just kind of drive my car through, hop out, center myself for the day, and then head to work. I often I did a lot of driving in San Diego, and I often prayed the rosary when I was driving to and from. I didn't really listen to music until after I'd done that because it just kind of helped me to let go of some of the stuff too. I think in medicine, I mean, often our residency cohorts, when we would hang out socially, we would just, the partners that were not in medicine would get frustrated because we were just talking about all of our hospital stories, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, but I think that's also very therapeutic to share what you can with people that have a similar experience. And it also can help with not bringing all of it home,
Mm.
which also became something I was more keenly aware of when my brother moved in with me. He lived with me
Mm.
for part of the pandemic, and my younger brother's not medical. And I suddenly realized that, I can't just tell him certain things.
And yeah.
I have to explain the context and like, why did this make me mad? And how does the system work? And what's it really like in the
Yeah.
hospital? Um, and then also some of the patient stories, he would be like, no, I don't want to know. That's gross.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, but no. And
Yeah.
so I think finding that balance of like working through things, talking through things in certain environments, and then also some of the stuff just working through between me and God. I think that that has helped a lot in maintaining the joy in all of this. It's not to say that I've never felt burnout or darkness in medicine. I think that's definitely, there's been a time and a place for that as well. But um, yeah, coming back from that has been a lot of leaning on my faith and my family and friends and like support system and just kind of taking a step back. It's like in medical school, when in the first couple of years when I really started to feel like, oh, all we're doing is studying in the library,
Yeah.
that was when I started volunteering at the free clinic. And suddenly it was like, oh, this is I can see what the long-term goal is again. I can see that working with patients and actually having the knowledge and the medical expertise to help is what I need to do in order to get to the other side. And so then like having that context motivated me to then go back and finish studying. So
Mm. Yeah. I'm curious, Anna, what about your faith has maybe changed as a result of this journey into medicine? How has it either been uniquely challenged or not necessarily like the day-to-day practice of what that looks like? I imagine if you're on call, you can't go to church and so on and so forth. But just what maybe surprised you about how you leaned on your faith in throughout this process, and maybe what brought you to maybe question it, as everyone does at different points in their life over
yeah,
the last
yeah.
10, 15 years.
I think the things that have been interesting to see are that I would say globally overall trajectory, I would say my faith has really deepened over the course of medical training. I would say it's kind of like the, ups
Yeah,
and downs as we climb
but
those stairs, but
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
it
but I would
rises.
say, like overall trend is up to
Yeah.
my faith. And part of it has been, it's very freeing to be able to acknowledge I am not in total control.
Mm.
I believe in a higher power who ultimately, you know, is above everything that I can and can't do. And these are my limitations, and I can talk to God about those. So that has been very freeing and has brought me a lot of peace, and being able to, as a Catholic, I go to confession, and that's also, I love doing that because then I don't have to carry that with me, that weight anymore. It's not to say that, I don't think about things that maybe I wish I had done differently still, but I don't have the burden of that, I guess, anymore. It feels a lot more like, okay, I've taken some steps to process and to adapt and grow and learn from that. I think in terms of challenges, I would say there have been, when I was in, the first part of the pandemic was hard because
Mm.
I was so used to having access to the sacraments in the church, and that all completely stopped suddenly. It was like everything was closed, including churches. And I was kind of like, what? I'm cut off from my spiritual source,
Mm.
and sort of learning. I think one of the things that I learned in the pandemic was um, to really open my heart to God. And I think I hadn't done that totally in that way prior. So that was also um, something that was, it was because I didn't have my usual, available
Yeah.
Catholic options. I just had to be completely like, okay, God, here's all I've got today. It's just, you know, um, and I think that taught me to pray differently as well. So I think I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I'm sure there were other moments where,
Yeah.
um,
Well, I just thought because, wrestling with life and death
yeah,
way that you do that you've never done before prior to being a resident. I'm always I have found that it frequently changes people's relationship with God. Usually, almost universally, it strengthens their relationship.
yeah,
So I was just curious what your experience had been, and
yeah,
it seems to be
yeah,
true across all faiths.
yeah. And I think,
Medical training is very,
yeah, I think
yeah,
part of the freedom too comes from recognizing that I can be mad at God if I'm, dealing with a patient who I'm so sad about, or devastating news that I have to give, or,
yeah,
something that didn't go the way we wanted it to, a horrible adverse event or that kind of thing. And God can take it. He's, able to handle my anger and to then
yeah,
work through it. It's just I think that has also been very free, that like I can just be really honest with God about like, hey, this sucked. Today was not good. And, then kind of introspecting on like the different components of that. So
yeah, yeah. I love that. Yeah, or sort of negotiating with God too.
yeah, yeah.
I
I
haven't.
ask God for things all day long. And I also, I mean, again, the Catholic option, I throw in all of the saints. So I just have long lists of the ones that I'm friends with upstairs. So
Right.
it's just you know, it's nice to feel like there's that community support too.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah. I have noticed that there's something very unique about residency, maybe surgical residency more so, and people's relationships with their faith. And maybe it also just sort of coincides with the period of your life, your 20s and 30s, that you would sort of be thinking about this anyway. I
Yeah.
think it's a catalyst in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of forces you to face all of the big life decisions. Have kids, don't have kids. What are you doing with this? Are we
Yeah.
pursuing treatment? Are we doing chemo? Are we going to do surgery? What do you want from your life? What does this all look like? It's a lot of
Yeah.
those, having those conversations with patients also, I think, invariably makes people reflect on, well, what would I want in this
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm curious, Anna, what advice would you sort of give to someone, a younger version of yourself, who had this real intellectual curiosity across so many different things and ultimately has to divide her time and commit very seriously to them individually. Would you have done anything different in your training in terms of organizing when you did things or when you explored these
I
co-curricular interests?
Yeah, I wish I could have gone back in time and done everything 5 years faster, you know?
Yeah,
I
would have
wish,
been nice.
yeah, I had some classmates who skipped grades in school and, started out younger, and I don't think I would have been emotionally mature enough to do that and navigate those challenges myself, but I think it's cool that they were younger when they graduated, you know? It's I would say if I could have this job and, all of the experiences that I've had over time and also be 5 years younger, like that would be cool.
That would be
Um,
the ideal combination.
yeah. But like part of me also has realized that uh, it's cheesy to say it's, the journey and not just the destination, but like there's truth to that,
Yeah.
It's it's a fun road, even though it is also very hard, and there are a lot of sacrifices involved. And it's partly a process of learning how to continue living while being in training.
Yeah.
How to like understanding that, yes, I am going through my 20s and my 30s and maybe my 40s. Uh, and also I am a sister and a daughter and a granddaughter and a friend, and I hope to one day also be a spouse, a partner, a mother, that kind of,
Yeah.
all of those different layers. And that's going to happen while I'm still doing the job part. So I think I remember there was like a women in surgery event at Dartmouth back in the day. It was like at a cabin in the woods,
Like all Dartmouth
all
events.
Dartmouth events. And one of the female physicians was saying, you can have it all, you just can't have it all at once.
Right. Yeah.
And I like that, because even though I do think sometimes you can have more, but
Yeah.
you maybe can't have it all, because there
Yeah.
is inevitably a tension given the fact there are only 24 hours in a day and you probably have to sleep for some of them. So
Yeah.
it's a matter of finding that balance, the give and take, the understanding of, more of this now, less of this later. Uh and then also just like the beauty of letting your natural interests kind of navigate and guide, and not being afraid to completely pivot. I was talking to a friend recently, actually this week, who she trained in family medicine, and as life happened and she got married and had 3 kids, and she transitioned from her private practice to working at a methadone clinic. He has become very interested in addiction medicine, but also had some flexibility as she was navigating the changes, and added on 2 other board certifications. So it's just, I think, finding a flexibility that fits with your interests and where you're at in life. I think that's kind of the biggest, or one of the big keys to success in all of this, because otherwise, if you're trying to just push one thing forward and it's not working, then there is the possibility that maybe that's not the best direction for you too. I mean, it's not always the case. Sometimes there are phases of training which are just a grind, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's a sign not to do it. But other times, I think the ability to, process that information and say, hey, maybe this isn't what brings me the most joy, and maybe this isn't. I remember my freshman year of college, I took organic chemistry, and my professor said something that I ended up quoting in my personal statement when I applied to medical school. He basically said his advice to us was that for a career, you have to find the intersection point between what you're good at and what you like to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the North Star.
Yeah.
There.
I also like to think of it as maybe, the decade you spend is training is sort of a bulwark also against like really stupid decisions you could be making in your 20s as well. Like it's a nice insurance
Fair.
policy.
Locked in a library, so
Yeah, you're
not
locked in
that's,
you know, you can't be making some,
yeah,
there's an upside to it.
yeah.
But anyway, in the last couple minutes that we have, Anna, I wanted you to think about your endeavors as a doctor, as a scientist, as an ethicist so far, and what have you learned about yourself through this journey that surprised you?
I'm continuously surprised at a lot of things about myself and my journey. But I think um, one of the things I've been reflecting on recently, I was pretty shy as a kid, you know?
Yeah.
I like a lot of elementary, middle, high school, I really didn't like meeting new people, talking in groups, like, you know, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. I was like, you know, I remember when I was on the newspaper staff in high school, and I was tasked with interviewing some of our like popular kids for various pieces, and I hated it because I had to walk up to them and like
Talk to them.
start a conversation, yeah, and then talk to them, and I was just like always so red and
Yeah.
like, let me just ask
Betty.
questions. Okay, let's move on. It was very uncomfortable. And I think that over the course of this training process, I've really bloomed. I've become much more comfortable in my own skin. And I think part of it is because of seeing so many people, like so many patients in such vulnerable conditions. It's like, I just more and more I've realized that like in those moments, it's really not about me, you know, and just being able to relax and be myself and have conversations with them and feel much more comfortable and not worrying about personal insecurities of like, you know, is my hair greasy? Is this like, are they judging me? You know, that kind of thing. So I've become much more comfortable in my own skin. And the other part of that has been having all of these conversations with people who don't necessarily share my opinions. Really, the turning point was, you know, we talked a lot about, and most of the conversations I've had have been really enjoyable and pretty respectful. But I have had conversations where I have had people yelling at me and saying things like, you shouldn't be practicing medicine and that kind of, you know.
Be expected.
Yeah, and I think the first time that happened, it really shook me. I was very uncomfortable, and I was like, why are you yelling at me? And that's really mean. And how do I make this stop? You know?
Yeah.
And then after that, I was kind of like, okay, well, I didn't die from that, you know? It was like a moment of reflection after. I mean, I cried, don't get me wrong. I was distraught in the moment. And then as I reflected on it, I was like, okay, that was really uncomfortable. I didn't enjoy that. And also, I'm still moving forward. And in fact, some of those bigger fights, the people that were, you know, the ones yelling at me later apologized and said like, hey, I'm sorry, that got out of hand. I didn't mean what I said, or I did mean what I said, but I shouldn't have yelled it at you, you know?
Yeah.
And that also was helpful in just kind of learning like to let certain things go, the negativity and, you know, other people's opinions, that kind of thing. It's like just I know myself, and my identity is formed based on, you know, my religious beliefs. And also there's a certain, I guess, confidence that comes from the fact that I feel like my identity is rooted in my faith. And so I can take it when people are mad at me or people are yelling at me, because fundamentally, like, I'm rooted in that. And that's something that's between me and God. And so it's just, I think that has been my personal evolution over this training process, where it's like I've just gotten much more comfortable with who I am. You know, I still sometimes do things that surprise myself. Like I'm just really awkward in a moment, and I'm kind of like, oh, I thought I was past that, but no, it's still there to a degree, you know. Just I can at
Here's
least
his ugly
like,
head.
yeah, like acknowledge it and be like, why did I run away from that? What was that
Yeah.
moment about, you know?
Yeah. It never really leaves you.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. Well, and you know, your friendship to me has been a great blessing, but I think um I I think anyone who meets you immediately feels this deep love of so many different things that you carry so gracefully in your day-to-day life. So thank you for sort of being the kind of person that we can all strive to be, and no matter what our path in medicine looks like, I will never own a lab or anything like that. But I think your your commitment to sort of seeking answers is very infectious, and I think anyone who meets you is impressed by that. So thank you.
Thank you. These are some of the nicest. I'm glad you're recording this because these are some of the nicest things I've ever heard said about me. So I'll just like
Well, if you can,
rewind back to these when I'm feeling sad and just be like,
yeah,
well,
if
this
you can
is
send
sad.
this to your family who,
Yeah.
you know, if they're anything like my family, they're reliably our strongest and most valuable critics. So
Yes. Yeah. Definitively. Yes.
so feel free to send this along to them too.
My mom probably won't like the outfit I picked. I'm just
I was
gonna
I was
put
going
that
to
on the
say,
record.
I was going to say, I'm sure within moments there'll be,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, snipes at what you're wearing and how your hair looks, but
Yeah. Yeah. It prepared us for surgery residency, you know?
exactly,
Got us done. Gotta own your decisions.
exactly. But anyway, and I know you're busy. I won't take much of your time, but thank you so much for chatting tonight.
This has been
It's
a
been
joy. It's been my pleasure.
such a real pleasure, and I'm just so excited to follow you in everything that you do.
Thank you.
All right, buddy.